distinguishing sexual violence from other forms of violence. Now that we've laid the foundation of how we define rape and violence, let's take the next step. What makes sexual violence distinct from other forms of violence? This is an important question because if we lump all forms of violence together, we miss the unique ways sexual violence functions, not only as a personal violation, but as a tool of social control. A unique kind of harm. Unlike a robbery or even a physical assault, sexual violence is not just about domination or injury, it is deeply tied to a person's identity, gender, and sense of self. As sociologist Jason Schnitker argued in 2022, sexual violence targets not only the body, but also the meaning of the body. It communicates something about status, power, and hierarchy. It says, you are less than, you are vulnerable, and I have the right to define your worth. This is why survivors often report not only fear or anxiety, but also shame, self-blame, and deep disruptions in their self-image. The wound is not just physical, it is existential. The continuum of sexual aggression. One way scholars describe this is through the idea of a continuum of sexual aggression. On one end, we have coercive acts that might not meet the legal threshold of rape, things like manipulation, unwanted touching, or pressuring someone into sex. On the far end, we see the most extreme forms: rape, and sexual homicide. Research by Gabrielle Salfati and Paul Taylor in 2007 shows that while rape and sexual homicide differ in degree, they share common dynamics: control, exploitation, and the reduction of a victim to an object. The difference is often in severity, not in kind. Both express the same logic, that someone else's body can be taken, used, or destroyed. This continuum reminds us that sexual violence doesn't emerge out of nowhere. It builds on patterns of entitlement, coercion, and disregard for consent, beyond simplistic frameworks. Now, many traditional approaches assume a simple model: male perpetrators, female victims. And yes, that is statistically the most common pattern, but it is not the whole story. In 2016, Turchik and colleagues challenged this assumption, pointing out that male survivors, female perpetrators, and same-sex violence are often ignored in both research and public conversation. This silence compounds harm, because victims outside the expected categories feel even less able to disclose or be believed. Think about this for a moment. A man who experiences sexual assault may hesitate to come forward because of cultural messages about masculinity. A woman assaulted by another woman may not find her experience recognized by either law or community. Survivors in same-sex relationships may fear exposing themselves to homophobic prejudice if they report. When our theories exclude these realities, we unintentionally reinforce the very silence and stigma that perpetrators depend on. The problem of underreporting. Another major distinction of sexual violence is its massive underreporting. Mary Koss's groundbreaking 1985 study revealed that most rape victims do not report their assaults, and many do not even identify them as rape. She introduced terms like date rape and acquaintance rape to capture the reality that most sexual assaults are not committed by strangers, but by people the victim knows. Koss's work showed that over a quarter of college women had experienced rape, but the majority never came forward. In her study, 84% of incidents involved acquaintances. Think about that. The majority of sexual violence takes place in the spaces we are supposed to feel safe, among friends, partners, or peers. Subsequent studies confirm this underreporting. For example, Lemaire and colleagues in 2016 found that even when women's experiences met the legal definition of rape, fewer than half labeled it as such. Why? Because of factors like benevolent sexism, rape myth acceptance, and cultural tolerance of harassment. This means that sexual violence hides in plain sight. Survivors may not speak up, not because the harm isn't real, but because society has taught them to minimize it, excuse it, or normalize it. Recognition and recovery research also shows us a fascinating distinction between acknowledged and unacknowledged victims. Littleton and colleagues in 2006 found that both groups experienced distress and trauma, but acknowledged victims, those who recognized and named their experience as rape, were more likely to seek help, receive support, and pursue justice. That recognition itself provided a pathway toward healing. On the other hand, unacknowledged victims often coped in silence, carried their pain privately, and had fewer opportunities for justice or recovery. Patterson et al. In 2009 described this as a kind of self-protection. Survivors avoided formal systems like the police or medical institutions, not because the harm wasn't severe, but because they feared disbelief, re-traumatization, or indifference. In other words, naming matters. Recognition doesn't just describe reality, it helps reshape it. Pulling it together. So let's summarize. Sexual violence is distinct because it strikes at gender identity, reinforcing systemic hierarchies in ways other violence does not. It exists along a continuum, from coercion to rape to homicide, but the logic, control, and exploitation is the same. Traditional frameworks often ignore male survivors, female perpetrators, and same-sex contexts, which perpetuates silence. Underreporting remains one of the defining features of sexual violence. Most survivors never report, and many do not even label their experiences as rape. Finally, recognition itself is transformative. Survivors who can name what happened and are believed have greater chances of healing. As we move forward, we must keep these distinctions in mind. They remind us that sexual violence is not just another category of harm. It is a deeply gendered, systemic tool of oppression. And to understand it fully, we must also consider how religion intersects with it, sometimes reinforcing harmful myths, other times offering powerful resources for recovery. That brings us to our next section, religion and social norms, and the complicated role faith traditions play in shaping both the silence and the healing around sexual violence.